You're listening to the Rent Roll Radio Show with Sterling Chapman. Hey, Rent Roll Radio listeners, welcome back to the show. As always, I'm your host, Sterling Chapman. We are joined by a really cool guest today. Her name is Ali Boone, and she's the founder of Hipster Investments. Ali, thank you so much for joining the show.
You bet. Thanks so much for having me.
Ali, can you tell us your backstory, kind of what you did before, how you got interested in real estate, and what you're doing today?
Sure. The super short of it is I grew up doing really nothing with real estate and had no idea I was going to get into it. Most of my schooling was in engineering. I got into the corporate world as an aerospace engineer. Obviously,
you're
very
a rocket
different.
Scientist.
Yeah, that's what my friends call me. In all fairness, my literal brain's like, didn't actually work on rockets. I was working on air-breathing engines, but yeah, it was a cool journey. I did start in engines, and obviously, I didn't do much with rockets, but so I got a master's degree in it. But through that dreadful degree, it was terrible. I was so bad at it. I shifted out of kind of more the technical side into the cognitive engineering. So I ended up doing more like cockpit kind of design, like user layout, user experience kind of thing. Because I'm a pilot, so I had that kind of like know-how of like needing to work in an airplane. And I say that to say like it kind of like it's more understandable how I ended up in real estate because I'm a little bit less on the technical side of engineering.
You haven't even said anything about real estate yet. And already we know you're an engineer, you're a rocket scientist, and you're a pilot. You're like
used to be a way more exciting person back in the day. I'm just not that cool anymore. I'm like, and then there's real estate.
And now we buy buildings.
Progressively over the last decade, my life has gotten more boring. Yeah, so I did all that. And where that came from was just that mindset that we all kind of grew up with. Go to school, get good grades, get a secure job. Like, hello, it was the epitome of what we're supposed to do, right? So I tell the story all the time. So I went through all the schooling. I'd been in school for 8 or 9 years. I land the dream job. And the very first day I ever walked into the cubicle, I remember, I can see it clear as day. I turned the corner into my new fancy cubicle and I looked at it and I was like, this isn't going to work. I knew it before I sat down. I was like, uh-oh. this isn't good. And I just knew it. So I ended up in that job for 5 years and I really tried to make it work. I grew up in Georgia and I started working for that company in Georgia and I took a job transfer for this really cool, even more dream job version and moved to California. And I tried it. I mean, I had the dream job, but I like to say that it was just not my dream. And so the whole 5 years that I was working in corporate, I was trying to find my way out. I had a bunch of skills, but nothing really, directly able to get me out of the 9 to 5. And so in that kind of exploration, I was reading every book I could, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, the E-Myth, I was like, I need it. And so I figured out I was either going to have to start a business or get into real estate investing. That seems like the obvious how you get out of 9 to 5. But I didn't really know how to do that. Long story short, I had decided to start a business. I didn't even know what kind, to be honest. But next thing I knew, a real estate investing opportunity webinar landed in my inbox. And I just watched it out of boredom. I was like, nah, whatever.
Who was it?
It was through Think Realty. This was so long ago. It was actually, I was still really cool back then. It was a fun and adventurous life. And this opportunity was pre-construction beach bungalows in Nicaragua, the third world country, because obviously that should be my first investment. So it was. And I watched this webinar thinking, this is ridiculous. This is such a scam. But I ended up just kind of, I don't know, it kind of called to me and I was like, tell me more. I love a good story. I'm like, invest in a third world country for my first investment. Obviously. And I love the beach. It's kind of a win-win. It's super affordable in a third world country. So I did that. And needless to say, that investment went belly up. But what came from that was I really started to meet real estate investors. And so it was kind of the first time that I met people who were kind of more like me. They're some level of adventurous because you have to be a little bit of a risk taker. Plus, these people are in a third world country investing. Definitely adventurous, intelligent, fun people. And I was kind of just like, I found my people. And I wasn't thinking much of it. I was really just planning to invest on the side while I continued to figure out my way out of corporate. And opportunities present themselves. The next thing I knew, turnkey rental properties. I had heard the term. I hadn't thought much about it. I was too excited about third world countries. And some people down on that project said, just a heads up, the next big market is Atlanta. And I was like, well, I'm from Atlanta. Tell me more. And so I almost accidentally, again, just thinking this was going to be a side thing, started buying turnkey rental properties because it kind of solved my challenge with real estate. Is I didn't want to be a flipper. I didn't want to swing hammers. I didn't want to do more work. I just wanted to invest.
Sure.
So when I learned about turnkeys, I was like, oh, problem solved. So again, still thinking it was a side thing. Next thing I knew, I was telling everyone who would listen about them. They started buying them. I ended up getting a real estate license, and then I started writing about it online. And that's when Bigger Pockets picked me up as a writer. So then I started writing there, and it just kind of formed from there, where it was just a very organic evolving into, I created a company out of it. So Hipster is, we're a matchmaker with turnkey providers, but also too, over the years, like I'm kind of an emotional support dog for people. So I help people find good turnkeys. I help them through the buying process. I help all of that. So I ended up leaving corporate 5 years afterwards for real estate, having no idea that that's what was going to happen. But that's what I've been doing ever since, almost for a decade now. So here we are.
Awesome. I've got lots of questions along the way. So,
but none of them have to do with third world countries.
So that's funny. I was looking at something. I was looking at investing in Belize the other day, and I was considering it until you told me your story. And now it's definitely bumped a few rungs down on the ladder of to-dos.
No, keep pursuing it. Is it pre-construction? That's where things can really go wrong.
I don't even remember what it was. Honestly, I remember like being on a run 3 years ago, like right when I was starting investing, and I was listening to like every Bigger Pockets, and this wasn't even Bigger Pockets. It was the radio guys, and they had like an advertisement for buying in Belize, and I'm like, I didn't even think about it. But my aunt and uncle go there every summer, and they were just saying how like the entire local economy is devastated right now because of COVID, and everything runs off of tourism. And I remember that ad, and I was like, well, I bet now would be a time to pick something up cheap there, and it's going to come back.
Probably. You know? And that was a lot of the thing with Nicaragua is Nicaragua really is kind of like the next Costa Rica, where Nicaragua, I ended up going down there about 5 times, I think, through this whole thing. To this day, it's my favorite country. It's so cheap and it's gorgeous. The people are nice. Like, oh my God, I fell in love with third world countries.
Isn't that the one where the government took all of Johnny Depp's money in the movie Blow?
Is it? Maybe.
Yeah.
I was about to say the one with all the government problems now. Yeah, it's gotten a little rougher since I was down there. I'm like, I mean, it was rough, calmed down, and all the investors. And, you know, when I was down there, this was 2011. And the big thing that was happening is it was in the middle of the crash. So people who were retiring, their 401ks and all that suddenly didn't have the same amount of money in them. And so expats were moving down to Nicaragua like crazy because at that time, and maybe still now, if you made 20 grand a year, you could live like a rock star, like full-time driver, full-time maid, like, and so people were moving there to get a better run out of their retirement funds, which made sense. And I mean, the project, in all fairness, the project I invested in, this was not some little mom and pop deal. Like Wyndham Hotels was in on it. Jack Nicklaus was doing the golf course design. Like this was a big development. And there were, you know, a lot of people with way more money socked into it than my little first investment. And so when it did go belly up, it was a big deal.
It was like a syndication type of deal, and you were just like...
No, it was owning. And so one thing about Nicaragua, I don't know what Belize is, but Nicaragua, you can actually own freehold because as an international investor, like if you're investing in another country, you have to be careful because it might be like one of those 99-year leases, like how much ownership percentage can an international or foreigner actually own? And you can own 100% in Nicaragua. So that was a big part of it is like I was actually going to own this property, deeded freehold, whatever the term is, which was, I mean, that was a lot of the appeal for a lot of people because you can't do that in a lot of countries.
Awesome. Let's see. What was towards the end of your story? We started talking about turnkey rentals. So I have some questions and some comments on turnkey rentals, and you can definitely...
A lot of people have both of those.
You can put me in my place if my comments are incorrect.
No, I'm like, bring them on. Let's dispel some things.
Before we get there, let's go to the first thing you said that you got me sidetracked with the Nicaragua. The first thing you said that drew my attention was about you wanted to be a real estate investor. You didn't want to be a flipper. You didn't want to do this work. Yeah. And I love to hear that because I don't either. And I've tricked myself into doing way more work than I wanted to. And I
Yeah.
see so many other people so much worse at it than I am, where they'll quit their job to go become a real estate agent, and they're working twice as many hours
Oh
as being a
gosh.
real estate agent as they were at their
Yeah.
day job. Or they're flipping houses, and they're working twice as much
Yep.
with like crummier work than
Yep.
like the job they left. And it
Yep.
was like, well, you're not investing. You're just traded one job for another.
Like, wait, and for some people, it's great. Like, if that's if that's in your repertoire of interests and skills and everything, 100%. It's not in mine. And that, my thought about it was, I'm not opposed to doing that if I have to do that. Like, if that's what it takes, okay. But I had reservations because, I could do it. I'm smart enough to figure it out, but it just isn't I don't like dealing with contractors. I'm so gullible. Like, they're like, oh, I don't like meeting contractors. I don't want to show up. I didn't want another job. Like, I wanted to leave corporate to hang out on the beach and go play in Nicaragua. I wasn't looking to whatever. I just assumed if I had to, fine. But in the midst of that, I was like, oh, hey, there's another way.
So back to the turnkeys. A lot of my wealth that was created in real estate was from like burring, like value add, where you take something that's distressed and 1 + 1 = 3. Whereas with turnkey, and my first 2 properties were essentially turnkey. They weren't like a turnkey provider, but they were ready to go. And I put down $15,000 and put a tenant in there. But I quickly ran out of money. Now maybe the rocket scientists and other engineers that you hang out with have a lot more cash on hand than I did starting out. But that's like one of the issues I see is you're not like really supercharging your net worth building. And as much as net worth is a superficial number and we should focus more on cash flow, I can't help but pay attention to it.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is how does anybody run out of money? Like, how much are these turnkeys spitting off? Because,
for sure.
in my mind, like the average person starting out, might have 50, 60 grand. Okay. That's 3, $75,000 houses.
Yep.
If they're being managed, and they're turnkey, they're probably kicking off $100, $200. But like best case scenario that I just described, somebody's like $600 a month. It's not exactly financial freedom.
No. Depending on where, unless you live in Nicaragua.
There you go.
That's what you do. You buy 2 turnkeys, you move to Central America. Boom. Like, I think I just figured out my new message to the world. Like, oh, you want financial freedom from turnkeys? Done. Just depends on where you want to live after. No, what you bring up is completely fair because that is absolutely the number one problem or challenge, we'll call it, with turnkeys is scaling. So, what I say in that is there's a couple of different ways to look at it. Is the reality is if you are starting with 50 grand, you're going to get 2 turnkeys done. Like that's about it. And at this today, you're going to be lucky to get $600 cash flow with those 2 turnkeys. So the thing with turnkeys is you really have to, they're not for everybody. I do say that if you have the interest and skill in burring or rehabbing or whatever, 100% go do that because the returns are going to be higher depending on what you're considering returns. If time or sanity or effort, plays into that. But the thing with turnkeys is it's all about having a fair perception of what you can get by getting a turnkey. So there's different reasons why you might want to get a turnkey. If you're wanting to scale and fly off to financial freedom, unless you have a lot of capital, that's going to be tough. Some of the reasons why you might want to get into turnkeys or why somebody might want to get into them. Number one, if you are thinking about burring or flipping or whatever, in my mind, it's so much, I don't know if safer is the right word, to start with a turnkey because the thing that turnkeys allow for is because all of the hard stuff is done for you. And if you've burred and rehabbed and all that, like rehabbing, negotiating, all those things are pretty advanced concepts. And so when a brand new investor goes diving off into the deep end to do those things, there's a lot that can go wrong. And one thing I like about turnkeys is because all the hard stuff is done for you, it allows you a chance because you're not 100% hands off with turnkeys. You have got to learn to run the numbers. And most importantly, you have got to learn to do due diligence. Like you need to understand what things to verify and to check on this property and what sustains cash flow. So it's one thing to run the numbers, but if the numbers are just projected, like what are risks? Why would the numbers possibly not happen? And what are mitigations for that? So you learn all those things plus learning due diligence. that skill set will carry you through any real estate investing strategy you're ever going to do. And when people, I feel like, start flipping or rehabbing or what the hard stuff right away, they're forced to skip over the fundamentals. So one reason why you might buy a turnkey is, people think that if they start with turnkeys, they have to stay with turnkeys forever. No, not even a chance. Like, you can buy one, learn the basics, and then slowly kind of graduate into the harder things. Or some people start with turnkeys, and through their learnings through those, they make different connections, and that kind of leads them kind of naturally into doing things more on their own without the turnkey provider. So in one sense, one reason is that they're kind of a gateway into a more solid footing into turnkey. So that's one way to look at it. Another way is, again, if you have the capital, yeah, sure. And with that, some people aren't looking for financial freedom. They're just, like I was originally, they're working a corporate job, they like their job, whatever, and they just want to do something smart with their money. So sometimes it's just more of a side investment. Like, instead of having my money sit in a bank and lose value, buy a property. And then
awesome.
And then after that, there's partnering options. I run a turnkeys Facebook group, and one of the guys on there who's been in there since the beginning, he wrote an article for us. He creatively financed 12 turnkeys. And so he kind of broke down like what all different ways he did that. So kind of the moral of the story is, scaling is absolutely the number one thing, because you're going to pay market value for these things. I mean, period. Right now, fortunately, the markets are appreciating so much that you are getting equity, which is not usually the case. But it's all about understanding exactly what the offering is and comparing that and relating it to what it is you're actually trying to achieve. So they have their place, is what I'll say.
Okay, awesome. I agree 100% with everything you said. So I guess my perception was that your approach was turnkey all the way to the top. And that was where I was kind of like, well, how do you do that?
But yeah. I started, that was kind of like I said, I was doing it on the side. And so I ended up leaving corporate for the business. So my income is partly from properties, and then partly, the business is also my kind of, well, I was about to say side hustle. I would have said that 10 years ago. It's my full-time hustle. But different people. I assumed, unless I had stayed an engineer until retirement age, I wasn't going to get financial freedom just from turnkeys at all.
Sure. So I agree 100% with what you said about that's a great way to start. And going back to my story, it's very much how I started. Now, there's a lot of multifamily gurus who'll tell you that you never had to have even owned your own house and you can go buy a 100-unit apartment complex. I mean, and maybe there's a couple success stories of that, but that's not how my comfort zone or my path worked. Like I said, I bought 2 turnkey. It wasn't from a turnkey provider, but it was houses that were ready to rent that I put a down payment on. And I learned a few things. Like, one of them, I had to replace the floor, but like that was like all I had to do was replace the floor in one room. And I like, oh, so you pay about the same for labor that you do for the materials. Oh, it's about $1 to $3 for material. And then like, oh, that's how much it costs to paint a bathroom. So like these little tiny projects. And then going through the process of renting them, it allowed me to build the confidence up to take the next step to go burr a house, and then the next step to go burr a fourplex, and the next step to buy a big apartment complex. Had I never done those turnkey properties, I would have never burred or bought apartment complexes or any of that. I mean,
you may have, it just may not have gone quite as gracefully.
Right. And I agree with you. Like, I don't think, like, when I have people reach out to me all the time that want to get started, and my first piece of advice is do it yesterday. It doesn't even matter if you lose money on your first deal. Just do it, because like the biggest hindrance of you being a successful real estate investor is never starting, because like 99% of the world never starts. But if you start and you stub your toe and you keep going, like, you'll eventually figure it out. Like, but I never really tell them to go like find a fixer upper burr, even though that's where I've built the most value. Like, I'm like you. I feel like, get your feet wet, buy a house that's like in pretty decent condition. You might end up having a sewer line you have to replace that blows all your profits for the first year. But like, it doesn't matter. It's not going to make you go bankrupt. It's not going to make you rich. But get your feet wet. Just get in the game.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, you mentioned the multifamily people saying, start with a multifamily. And I think one of the biggest, there's a few challenges with the real estate investing industry in general, but one of them is just kind of the marketing messages that are out there. So it's like, oh, you're a brand new investor, you should definitely wholesale. Okay, well, I'm like, like, maybe for some people, 100%. It's a simple process, but that it's not easy necessarily. So
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of marketing messages, and it's one thing to have bad marketing messages. It's another thing to leave out details. And I think the thing that's left out of rehabbing and flipping and all that is how vast the risk spectrum really is. People just, and now HGTV is not helping, but people get into those projects, and it's not because you can't do it. It's because you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what a particular risk is. So therefore, you don't know that you need to mitigate it. And so that, I think the slower start is, let's try and learn these lessons not all at once, shall we? Because, and it's a building process, because like you said, this is an on-the-job training kind of industry. You have to make mistakes and learn from them. And that's how there's no investor under the sun, at least with more than a couple properties, that hasn't run into that. So yeah, it's that slower start. Build your foundation before you go buck wild and blow your entire savings account.
Yeah. So 3 comments there. One, the shows, I never watched the HGTV. Occasionally
I didn't either, actually.
I'll see one like on the TV at the doctor's office or something. And one thing I noticed is like, they'll have like a teacher and a cop. And I love teachers and cops, like nothing against them, but like, how much they make. And they're like, their budget is like 1.4 million. It's like, wait, what?
Like, really? Because, okay. Maybe I was doing my math wrong on my own salary.
So the other things, I've never flipped or wholesaled a house for a very different reason. And people always come up to me and ask me about wholesale. I'm like, well, I have like a very decent paying job that I enjoy. I just wanted to get into real estate for other, like, I didn't want to like give up my high paying job for like what was likely a less paying, nastier type of job, with the wholesale and then the house flipping. It's just like you said, it's just too risky for me. So I just see like market shifts. I still to this day, with all my experience, refuse to do like buy anything that wouldn't cash flow, like the high end flips. I just I see great opportunities come out. Like, oh man, I can make $100,000 on that. But it's almost like I have it written down in a card that I keep in my pocket. Like, no, stay in your lane.
Yeah.
Because that's the story I tell everybody. Because, outsiders often don't really understand the different types of real estate investing. They just hear real estate investing and they go, oh man, that's risky. In 2008, my Uncle Bob lost all his money. And I quickly kind of go to the point of, well, he probably had 5 different flips he was working on that didn't cash flow. And he had short-term hard money loans on all of them that expired in a year. And then the market dropped overnight and he couldn't sell them for half of what he owed for them. So then I kind of go on to explain what I do with my rental portfolio, the apartments, and how everything I have cash flows. I always have adequate cash reserves and I always have long-term fixed debt, and how that really hinders, all of the risk. So I try and follow that religiously and avoid the shiny object syndrome of, I could go make $100,000 on that flip.
Yeah. It's so true. And there's a meme online or something that I, for some reason, keeps showing up in my Instagram or something, but it's a picture it's in support of baby steps. And it's a picture of 2 guys both trying to go up a ladder. And one of the ladders has normally spaced.
I saw that the other day.
Yeah. I don't know. Why are we all seeing this right now? But then the other guy's trying to reach for the big spaced out one. And it's so true. Real estate more than anything. I know. And I get it. It's frustrating. It's ooh, shiny object. I could make $1 million. Well, it's those little baby steps, keep adding them together, that makes for the big thing. And, a high-end flip, it's all speculative, high entry price, all these things. It's not that it can't work, but dear God, not for your first investment. You've got to build your skill set. So by the time that thing shows up, you've got your bases covered, because what's going to happen if it doesn't work out, or a 2008 happens, or whatever? There are so many ways to mitigate all these risks, but you just can't learn it right out of the gate. I don't care who gives you a how-to guide on how to do it. It's just, that's not how it works.
No, absolutely. So real quick, I want to hop into a few different sections. The first one is, tell us about your best deal ever.
Oh, well, all the properties I bought in Atlanta in 2011, kind of. It's funny because people will come to me and they're like, "Hey, what are the numbers on your turnkeys?" I'm like, you don't want to know. You don't want to know. When I bought those turnkeys in Atlanta, it was very well presumed that an appreciation boom was coming. Number one, we were in the crash. Number two, Atlanta had a very unique dynamic going where the rents during the crash never fell, but the housing values did. So suddenly this price to rent ratio situation was, I mean, my very first turnkey, golly, it's a cute house. I still have it. It was $55,000, freshly rehabbed, 2 stories, good neighborhood. I mean, hello. And the rent on it was $975. And I think today I'm getting, that one's either $14.95 or $15.95 in rent, and I paid $55,000 for it.
Yeah, I'll take 6 of them right now.
Oh my God. I tell people all the time, I was just getting into real estate back then. Oh, if I knew then what I know now, if we got to go back to that time, which I doubt we will, oh man, I would have bought up half that city. Like, but all of the properties I bought in 2011, 2012 have somewhere between double and quadrupled in value. And then again, the price to rent ratios are crazy. So, I mean, I hate to make a boring kind of blanket statement about my best investments, but those are, I mean, that's something I'm probably never going to get a chance to get in my life again. And I have people, sometimes they'll say, I get frustrated sometimes. I've had to hire and fire property managers. I'm 2,200 miles away from these properties. And, things can get frustrating as they can with any property. And so the question has come up, would you ever consider selling them? And I'm like, to do what with the money? There's no investment under the sun that would make me as much as these properties are. And like, I'm pretty sure. I'm like, no. I have if I could cuddle with these things at night, I would. But I mean, God, all the Atlanta turnkeys during the crash, unbeatable.
Awesome. So, what advice do you have for somebody else getting started in 2021 who is in a quite different market than 2011? I mean, it's just. It's crazy. It's crazy.
The buying demand's about the same. Everything else is different.
Yeah.
2021, it is, I don't think you could have paid me to think that a global pandemic was going to cause what it has with the housing market. I assumed it was going to go quite the other direction. Anyone getting it started, regardless of what year it is, one thing to know about 2021 is the difference between an investor mindset and a consumer mindset. In 2011, everybody could buy properties because cash flow was there was no special sale. It's like everything's on sale, everything's on clearance. It's great property, it doesn't take a creative investor mindset to buy in that kind of market. And ever since then, the market's only been going up. Now we're in a situation where inventory is super low, prices are high, cash flow is getting so squeezed, if not more than so squeezed. And now interest rates are coming up. Thank you, Fannie. But it does force, investors from the 80s, they had 13 to 16% interest rates and people made it work. And so now what I think is happening is it is going to force people, it's forcing the consumers out. The consumers, it was so easy to buy an investment property at a 3% interest rate. No problem. But now that interest rates are starting to creep up, mind you, they're still at pretty all-time lows. It's forcing a different mindset because it is kind of going to start weeding out the consumers. So as you get into real estate investing, understanding the difference in an investor and a consumer mindset. And then the second thing, and this is whatever year you're getting started, kind of like we were saying earlier, just take the step back for 5 seconds and learn more about the strategy that you're trying to pursue. Because I have people all the time that come to me and they're like, hey, do you think this is a good deal? And I'm like, do you think it's a good deal? And they're like, I think so. I'm like, oh, why? Blank face. And it's like, okay, cool. And I was totally that person. Before Nicaragua, I had looked at rental properties out here in California and I was looking at them. I just didn't know what I was supposed to be looking for. Like I hear the numbers. I don't know what those mean. It doesn't take a lot of information to be way more educated on what you're about to do than not. What makes a successful version of a rental property, if that's what you're going to do? If you're going to BRRRR, what makes for a successful BRRRR? Learn to run the numbers. What are the risks? What are those mitigations? It's not a hard knowledge set to learn, but learn it. So that way you don't ever have to ask. And if you have to ask someone else if it's a good deal, you don't know enough. You should be able to determine if you think it's a good deal. So people are like, well, I'm not sure when, I should pull the trigger. And I'm like, you should pull the trigger when you can intelligently tell me why you think this is a good deal. It doesn't mean it's going to work out perfect. There's no guarantees. But if you can intelligently say, oh, well, I like it for this reason, I saw a risk here. Here's, kind of my thoughts about that, da, 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 da. It's that simple. But pause before you dive in. Like, that is evergreen information, applies to any year whatsoever. Just because I see so many people goof it up in real estate investing, and rightfully so. We didn't learn this in school. It's overwhelming. There's so many options. You don't know what you don't know. And, people get jaded from what's a really cool industry with a lot of potential. And I hate seeing people that. So it's like, slow down, pause, learn a little, then make and like you said, kind of, move up the ladder a little bit.
Awesome. So I want to switch to our radio round real quick to let our listeners get to know you a little bit better. 3 questions. First question is, what is your favorite book?
Am I allowed to say my own? I just put my first book out.
Absolutely.
Oh, well, in that case, let's see. Do I even have a copy sitting right here? So thank you, 2020 quarantine. I finally got my first book out. It is called Not Your How-To Guide to Real Estate Investing, Life Lessons on Hacking Your Mind Before You Hack Your Wallet. And it honestly, I only say it's my favorite because it's mine, but it's a lot of what we talked about, where it is taking that step back before the how-to guides of how to look at this industry, how to learn more about what you don't know, and how to kind of navigate what strategy might be better for you. And I tried to add some personality into it because, let's be honest, real estate investing books are not always all that funny. Yeah, so that one, aside from that, for real estate investors, obviously Rich Dad, Poor Dad, it got me my start, as it did many other people. So of course I have to give a shout out to that one.
Awesome. We hear that quite a bit. What's your favorite quote?
My favorite quote is, don't take advice from someone you wouldn't trade shoes with. I use that quote every day in life. I use it in entrepreneurship, but my God, I use it in real estate investing because, again, you Google how to be a real estate investor. There are a lot of people who are going to try and tell you how to do it, what you should do, all that. The biggest thing for me it's such a life lesson too, is I look and see, what's the thing I need advice on? And if that person is achieving that thing, I mean, I don't want to take relationship advice from someone who's 6 times divorced.
Yeah. It's always the newbies that are the most opinionated on subjects they have never.
Honestly, Bigger Pockets, since we mentioned that, I swear the most opinionated people on there have never done a deal in their life. And I'm like, oh God. And don't take flipping advice from someone who's never gotten out from behind the computer screen. So I think it's especially applicable in this industry because we don't necessarily know how to navigate it or who to listen to.
Absolutely. What is your favorite thing to do outside of work?
Well, keeping with the adventuresome spirit, my absolute favorite thing to do is volunteer in prisons. I go into California state prisons. There was a year or two where I was going every Sunday, a big road trip up to the prison. I absolutely love it. It has my heart. And yeah, I love hanging out in prison, which would be hilarious if someone tuned in right now. They're like...
Sterling's podcast is taking a weird twist.
Wow, she said she was adventurous, but goodness.
So how can our listeners get in touch with you, find out more about you, get your book, follow you, all that?
So I actually set up a link for your listeners to get a free copy of the book. It's a free digital copy. There is a link on there if you're like me and need to hold a book. I can't do digital copies. So my company's name is Hipster Investments. So if you go to hipsterinvestments.com/rentroll, you can get a free digital copy of the book there. If you want to get it from Amazon, the link's there, but also my contact information is on there also. And the only thing I ask in return is I'm a new author. Leave a review if you check it out and share it with friends and family if you think it's helpful.
Awesome. Will do. Ali, thank you so much for joining the show. I really enjoyed it. If I didn't have to run, I could spend another hour with you, but I really enjoyed it.
That just means we'll have to do it again.
Absolutely. Let's plan on it. We really look forward to keeping up with you on your journey.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to the Rent Roll Radio Show brought to you by Crestworth Capital. We hope you enjoyed the show, and if you did, please hit the subscribe button and leave us a rating and review. You can also visit us at crestworthcapital.com or rentrollradio.com, or follow us on Facebook at Rentroll Radio or at Crestworth Capital. If you would like to reach us, feel free to shoot us an email at info@rentrollradio.com or sterling@crestworthcapital.com. We hope you come back next week to join us on some more of our journey. Until then, happy investing.